I'm very pleased to be here, and this is one of the most important topics that we could be addressing for our future. I would like to give you three messages. One is that the old social contract that we had between citizens, government, business is dead. The second is that I will indicate what the reasons are, where the problems lie. And thirdly, I'll indicate what I believe is the way forward. Let me tell you something about the old social contract. In the old social contract, we were focused on aggregate material prosperity, GDP, growth. What's good for the economy is good for society. That's point one. Point two is that governments have a dominant influence on the economy and influence on the fate of their citizens, and therefore citizens can look to their governments to provide them with their basic needs. Governments are responsible for their countries, and countries compete with one another on the big economic and political stage. That's point two. Point three of the old social contract is that upward mobility in society can be ensured through upskilling. And the skills that we need are predominantly cognitive and technical skills. And point four of the old social contract is that people, individuals, are primarily concerned with material prosperity, and therefore the government's responsibility is to spread that prosperity across the population. And inequalities, as they arise, can be managed through the redistribution of income in the short run and the redistribution of skills in the longer run. And fifth and lastly, this old social contract says that social allegiances follow economic allegiances. So if the government ensures broad prosperity in its country, then it can be assured of the social allegiance of its citizens. Those are five important points regarding the old social contract. We focus on material prosperity. Governments have a dominant influence on our economic future and otherwise. Upward mobility through reskilling. We are concerned mainly with the distribution of wealth, and therefore redistribution is required in the face of inequality, and social allegiance follows economic allegiance. All these points of the old social contract no longer hold. And let me go through why we have problems in each one. First of all, we are not entirely dependent and focused on material prosperity. After the Second World War, when many countries, at least in the advanced Western world, were cohesive socially, because in the wartime, social cohesion is something that is melded. And also after the Second World War, people felt empowered because they were rebuilding their societies. There, the big lack was material prosperity. And then to focus on material prosperity was just the right thing. But with the passage of time, our social cohesion and our sense of empowerment has gradually started to slip. And we see that very profoundly in big social movements nowadays. When people in many different countries, say in Great Britain, say take back control, that arises out of a sense of disempowerment. They don't feel that they are in control and they want it back. When people say in the United States, America first, or foreigners out, then they feel that their social bonds are threatened. They feel that their social solidarity is eroding. And therefore, we should keep in mind that human well-being is not founded entirely on material well-being. Humans need empowerment and they need social solidarity. And those things that we had little regard to at times when they were plentiful are now under threat. And digitalization is playing a role in driving these threats and will continue to play that role unless we redirect digitalization into different areas. And you can see why. Machines are getting better and better at taking over routine tasks. And if most people look at what they do all day, lots of their work consists of the performance of routine tasks. So naturally they are worried and naturally they feel a sense of active or potential disempowerment. The other thing that digital media does is it connects people who do not share geographic propinquity, who are not physically close to one another. Now, governments operate in a physical space, in a country that is geographically bound. And as long as societies were bound in the same way as polities were bound, there was political legitimacy that could be generated. Through the new digital media, we connect with people across national boundaries, and that can give rise to a faltering sense of social solidarity within our nation state. And therefore, we need to keep in mind that the old social contract that focused entirely on material prosperity needs to be extended, at least to consider empowerment and social embeddedness. Secondly, the influence of governments on the economy and the fate of their citizens is dwindling. And the reason is globalization. Global value chains extend across national borders. Governments their countries being part of these global value chains find it more and more difficult to set the stage for their citizens. Factories nowadays that produce goods and services span many countries. In this new environment, countries no longer compete with one another. What competes are global value chains. They stand in competition with one another, and these global value chains extend, as I said, across countries. And that means that for countries to achieve their aims in terms of material and non-material prosperity, what is necessary are multilateral agreements. Multilateralism becomes an essential facilitator for nationalism, regionalism, localism, and so forth, because we are interconnected economically, And unless we interconnect politically and socially to address the big problems that we share, we are in trouble. There are many politicians nowadays who are growing in influence, who live in the past, who still believe that it is countries that compete and that we have a zero-sum game. They are not in touch with what the new interconnected world implies. That part of the social contract is also dead. The third step of the social contract, that you can achieve upward mobility through upskilling, also does not hold with regard to routine tasks. As long as skills are routine, it's not clear that you will be upward mobile because technologies are taking over more and more sophisticated routine tasks. And before, in 20 years ago, we as economists used to talk about skill-biased technological change. That is, technological change that helps skilled people and doesn't help the unskilled as much. And therefore, the business of the unskilled was to get skilled. Go to university, learn some technical competences, and you've beat the system. No longer true. As long as it is routine tasks that you do, you will have a problem down the line, and you will be competing not with low-wage workers in other countries, but with cheap machines. And therefore, we will need to think carefully about what skills actually mean in this new age. We need to redefine what skills are in terms of non-routine tasks that are complementary with machines rather than substitutes for them. The fourth point is that inequalities can be managed through redistribution. No longer so. First of all, lots of inequalities are created through big digital monopolies that operate globally, and that creates a lot of market power, and it's not clear how that market power can be managed on a global setting unless countries cooperate. They are difficult to regulate. Redistribution of income can be profoundly disempowering. The long-term unemployed in advanced Western economies receive unemployment benefits. They are not empowered thereby. They don't say, thank goodness I now have enough leisure on my hands to now study philosophy and the arts and to take care of my body and so forth. That is the message that we are giving people with regard to universal guaranteed basic income. It is a glorified type of long-term unemployment benefit, and it is disempowering. The long-term unemployed feel profoundly that they are not needed in society. That is a problem we need to deal with. And redistribution of skills, as I said, is not an issue as long as work is routine. And lastly, social allegiances don't necessarily follow economic allegiances. There is, as we've heard, a sense of decoupling of economic prosperity from social prosperity. Countries can be growing, and nevertheless, lots of people can be left behind, disempowered, angry, frustrated, and calling into question the legitimacy of governments. So the old debate between left and right is being replaced by a debate between open and closed, about bit of identity politics replacing the old ideologies. And that should make us more aware than ever before that we need to deal with other sources of welfare than simply material well-being, because it can become decoupled. Now, what is to be done? That is, in fact, the central issue that underlies the Global Solutions Summit that will be next one taking place on the 18th and 19th of March in Berlin, that the Global Solutions Initiative advises the G20 in the long run. There are, to my mind, two things that need to be done to establish a new social contract. The first is that we need to help people develop skills that are complementary to the new technologies and not substitutable by them. And those are primarily skills that are social skills, creative skills, and meaning-generating skills. So social skills, if you are a geriatric, in a geriatric ward in a hospital, you would prefer to be stroked by a human being rather than a robot. And hopefully that human being would have a sense of empathy, would be able to do some mentalizing, would be able to take your perspective and help you give some meaning to your life. Those are skills that can all be trained, but our education and training institutions largely ignore them. Creative skills, we need to enhance our curiosity, we need to become more adaptable, we need to understand where the new challenges lie in non-routine ways. That requires radically new forms of training. And therefore, I believe the time has come for us to repeat the miracle that took place about 400 to 500 years ago, when humanity gave itself the challenge that all of us should become literate. At that time, less than 15% of the world's population, far less. In 1820, 12% of the world's population could read and write. Nowadays, 17% can't do so. We've achieved a huge amount. If now we say our job in the future is for humanity to widen its circle of compassion, care, perspective-taking with regard to people who lie across our social and cultural divides, then we will have done the counterpart to what we did 500 years ago. What we did for our technical skills there, we can do for our social skills now. So that's point one. We need to move from the welfare state that basically provides economic security to an empowering state that enables us to affect our own fate through our own efforts, that embeds us in fruitful interactions within our social groupings. And lastly, I believe we also need to free ourselves from what I call digital slavery, slavery 2.0. What slaves used to be focused on is they could run away from their slave owners, but if they did so, they left all their possessions behind, they left all their contacts behind, their previous identity, everything. We nowadays generate a lot of information about ourselves, but it doesn't belong to us. We can leave the networks who have property rights over the information that we generate, but if we do, then we leave all the information that we have generated behind, all our contacts, all that our digital identities need to be rebuilt again. We have no property rights in the information that we generate. That is both inefficient and it's inequitable. Huge disparities in market power. It makes us subject to manipulative advertising. It makes us vulnerable to hackers, vulnerable to digital automation. At the last Global Solutions Summit, Chancellor Merkel said the digital data should be priced, and users should be able to sell their data. They can do that once they have property rights. And therefore, the solution is to give them property rights on the data they generate. And that can be done through self-sovereign identities. That's basically the digital equivalent of a wallet that contains verified pieces of one's digital identity. And that enables us to provide data to those who we want to receive it. In order for that revolution to take place, it will require public support. There will need to be an infrastructure that shows that the data is trustworthy, coherent institutions to provide consistent usage rights, and an international legal framework that allows us to manipulate digital identities. The EU General Data Protection Regulation is already moving in this direction, and this would enable us to do what we have done in the digital world, and with what we only succeeded in doing in the physical world through the Industrial Revolution, which is give us property rights to the things we generate, allow us to buy and sell those things, and we will prosper. In the digital domain, this is not possible at present. We give away information for free. We get apps in return for free. We have no guarantee that there's any correspondence between them. And therefore, my second suggested solution is to end digital slavery now. Thank you.